Perfect, thank you. And there will be people coming in, so we might get a few interruptions, but I'm just going to introduce Dr. Todd Cunningham. So in addition to being a faculty member at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, he's also a school and clinical psychologist with a private practice, which is Bright Light Psychology Clinic, which he's had for over a decade. He has doing a lot of innovative research in the area of assistive technology and learning strategies to support all learners. So it's really a great opportunity to get Dr. Cunningham to speak about what the impacts of being away from school for this long might be, as well as some strategies. So, Dr. Cunningham, when you're ready.
Well, thanks, Robin. So thank you for everybody for attending. And really, this came out of some work that we were doing in terms of just thinking about how do we best go about supporting students during this time when we're not at school on a regular basis? And are there some things that we need to be thinking about, in particularly of what we need to be doing to better support students to help mitigate some of the effects that might occur when they have been out of kind of the formal structure of education on a day-to-day basis? And so I'm calling this the COVID slide, but really the COVID slide's not been well researched. It's just kind of a title for the project. What this is based on, though, is a really good sound of information called the summer slide, or the brain drain, that has been kind of coined as. And what the summer slide has shown in both in the areas of reading, math, and in Canada actually as well in the area of French and other literacy, is that during the period of the summer, there's about a 10 to 30% loss of the knowledge and skills that one acquires over the course of the year. So if we go from kind of the fall of grade 1 to the spring of grade 1, and then the students go over the course of the summer, there is this decrease in skills. So when they start back in grade 2, they're not at the same place that they ended at the end of grade 1. More particularly, if we actually break down into this more specifically, we see that literacy does a little bit better than numeracy. So literacy can kind of keep its skills going better over the course of the year than numeracy. Numeracy has more of a gap that begins to emerge. And because of this kind of sluggishness over the course of each summer, because of these skill deficits that emerge, is that there is actually a gap that begins to emerge. You know, the literacy rates actually are stronger than the numeracy rates over time, and part of that is due to this kind of the sliding effect that happens every single summer, where they slide backwards a bit. Not only do we see this in the younger grades, but this has also been documented in the older grades, all the way up to grade 9 at this point. And when we think about this, when we think about why is literacy and numeracy, why during this time of when we're not at school, why do we have such a decrease in ability? Again, it's kind of between 10 to 30% based on what grade you're in and based on what skill you're looking at. And a lot of it is kind of like going to the gym. Or the reason for this is like going to the gym. So when we go to the gym, we go there to be able to work out and build muscles and build up our cardiovascular system. And if we go to the gym for 8 months or 10 months of the year and are getting in good shape, but then we completely take a break for 2 months of the time, when we return to the gym again, we are not going to be at the same level that we were when we left. Our system will have not kept up. And some of us might be actually finding that right now during this COVID period. We're not quite in the same physical shape that we were before COVID hit in, because we haven't been kind of working those muscles. And the same is when it comes to education in terms of learning. When we are developing critical skills, such as the ability to read words, decode and read words and understand, our ability to build up our vocabulary, our ability to know numeric operations, how to add, subtract, divide, do bed mass, do fractions. When we're developing these knowledge and skills over time, then we're practicing doing those, we have to keep using them, because if we don't continue to use it, we start to lose it. Many people who learn a foreign language find the same thing. They practice and they work at developing a foreign language, a new language for themselves. But when they stop using that language on a day-to-day basis, they find that it takes a little bit of time to kind of get fluent back in it. Our brains are built, like our muscle systems, on systems that it prioritizes and continues to refine for those things that we are currently working on versus those things that we're not working on. It prioritizes those aspects. And when we're learning something new, when we're developing a new skill, such as the ability to read, do math, be able to um, um, uh, literacy, our vocabulary, and that is that during this time of development, these skills are actually we can run into challenges where we actually lose these skills a lot because we're not quite working on the development of those skills. They haven't consolidated yet. They're not proficient yet, that we can quickly lose those development of those skills. And that's where we actually see, especially in the younger grades, we see more of this occurring. We see the issues happening more often in the younger grades where core skills have not quite consolidated. Now, if the summer slide was kind of equal across all students in our population, then it wouldn't be that big of an issue because all students would gain the same amount of time during the school year and they would lose that amount of skills over the course of the summer. And then we would just basically start off where they were to be able to catch them back up and then kind of push them forward through the year. So overall, we might during a time of students in school, they because they take the summers off, they might not get as far down the learning path over the course of their life, but at least all students are having this happen to them, and it's just kind of one of the costs of having summer vacation. We need time off. We need to go out. Kids want to run around and play, but in fact, yeah, there's some cost associated with that, but it hits everybody equally. But that's not actually the case. When it comes to the research we know about the summer slide, is that not all students are impacted equally across this. In fact, there are some students who actually have some gains that come out of the summer period versus other students who have a real loss. So the first data I showed you was kind of the average between all students. And then this is what I'm going to kind of break it down into different types of groups. And the first important group to be able to think of is when we look at those who come from high income families versus low income families. And what was shown from the high income family group is that they actually got a boost every single year during the summer. So they'd have about the same amount of learning during the school year, and then we had the slide take place, or we got to the summer. Those in high income families continue to accelerate on the learning path, and those in low income families actually had a decrease in ability. They actually experienced the slide that occurred. And so this research that was originally done back in 1970 and replicated again in 1996 really started to talk about, well, what's happening during the summertime that kind of leads to these two groups having differential impacts of what's happening in the summer. And so there, in 1996, a bunch of researchers began to look at this, and they found some really interesting data. One, when it comes to the higher income families having better gains over the summer, that only was attributed to reading. So students who came from higher income families, their reading abilities continued to increase over the course of the summer, where those in lower income families, they decreased over the summer when it came to reading. However, that was not the same for mathematics. In mathematics, both groups actually had a bit of a slide in the summer, with the lower income families having a bigger slide, but also the high income families also had a slide in their areas of mathematics. They also went down. So clearly, it wasn't just due to SES. There was something else going there. And when they began to look at it, it was actually due to the priority and access to materials. So those in higher income families, when it came to reading, they were able to access books. They were encouraged to read books, and they actually had books to be able to read. Versus those in lower income families, they didn't actually have access to the types of material, reading material, to the same degree to be able to practice that skill. So that kind of led to these two different rates beginning to emerge. And so the research wanted to take this a bit further and kind of go, okay, so what happens if we actually divided the groups into, instead of looking at SES, so let's look at abilities. Let's take the groups and look at them in terms of ability. Kind of high ability, who have access, who also have access to materials, medium ability, who have access to material, and low ability, who have access to material. And let's look at this kind of group. So everybody has kind of the similar access to material because they came from medium to high income families. But now we're looking at just entry ability. So what was found is during the typical year from kind of grade 2, fall grade 2 to the end of grade 2, students were having about the same reading rate. So that, this is reading and this is mathematics. Or sorry, this is reading between grade 2 to grade 6, and this is grade 6 to grade 9. I'll show mathematics next. And what they actually found is during the course of the year, the reading rates were about the same. So the amount of gains taken over the course of the year were about the same. However, in the summer is where we really saw these decreases taking place, this divergence really beginning to emerge. And by the end of grade 6, we see that there's a huge difference in abilities that begin to emerge as we go through in terms of reading. Same with mathematics. So we have these divergences that beginning to really emerge when we take the same group of students, and then we basically, at this point, we differentiate them into the different camps. We can see that they're, over the course of the year, their abilities are increasing, but then we have decreases. So across abilities. So we really kind of begin to see here is that when it comes to abilities, that there's a real impact on ability. If I don't have the ability to continue to read or have access to this, then I don't begin to be able to continue to develop my scores. I don't continue to develop my abilities to read or do mathematics. I need to work on developing of those skills. I need to be at the gym to do it. And when they're at school, they make the gains. So that these slopes, these gain slopes during the year for these individuals were at about we're not different, significantly different. So it's showing that they are, when they're in school, they're actually making the types of gains that we would expect them to do. Now, again, this data is not actually for kids who have special needs. This was looking at just general able students and really differentiating in general ability students just about high, medium, and low, just dividing them up a bit more. So we see that, again, there's something happening here where we have these students who are falling behind. They're falling behind when they aren't practicing working on that. In Ontario, we've actually seen the same thing. So there's actually some really good literature in Ontario that shows this same kind of gap that begins to emerge. So this was looking at Davis was looking at grade 1 to grade 3 students. And what they did is they took the students and they looked at the kind of the top 25%, the bottom 25%, and the middle 25%. And they looked at their literacy abilities over the course of going, over the course of being away for the summer. And what they found in terms of literacy rates is they found that for students who were in that top quartile group, is that they made about 3 months gain in their literacy skills. And those at the bottom quartile, they had 3 months loss within their literacy skills. Now, Davis's group, unlike the previous research, this research, it didn't look at kids who had learning challenges at all. They just took average students and they just divided average students into like really good students, middle of average students, and lower of average students. This research, Davis's research actually, when you look at the bottom 20%, these students would actually are impaired students. They're actually having some real challenges. So what we see in the Davis research is our strong students, they're accelerating by 3 months, and the bottom students, they're actually losing skills by 3 months. So when they all come back in September, now we have a real achievement gap. We have almost a 6-month difference in ability between the top and the bottom students in the area of literacy. And when it comes to the achievement gap, this has a real profound impact as we start to look at this over time. So when it comes to the achievement gap, the idea is that during the course of 1 year, you learn about 1 unit of skills. You develop your skills over what would be typically expected for 1 year. However, for those students who have challenges, such as having learning disabilities or at risk for having a reading disability, what we see is their abilities over time, though they continue to increase, the gap between where the proficient individuals are and where they are continues to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And part of this is again due to this issue that they're just not spending as much time on task. So our students who have these challenges, early on the gap's not seen that big, but it does continue to escalate over time as we're going through. And one of the questions about why is this? Why is it that we're having these problems over time is due to what's known as the Matthew effect. And the Matthew effect states the richer get richer, the poor get poorer. Those who are, we'll take reading, those who are rich in reading, when they go home at the end of the day and sit down, what do they like to do? They like to read. They pick up a book. I look at my 8-year-old right now, and she's into Nancy Drew, and she loves just sitting in her little chair each day and reading, just reading. She's able to read, she likes to read, and so she actually practices reading on a day-to-day basis. And she has access to those materials, which is great. However, then you take those students who have challenges, who aren't very good at reading, and then what happens to them over time? Well, they don't have the same amount of on-task time. It's hard for them. So when they go home after school, what do they do? Well, they're not going to voluntarily read. They're going to do something else. They're going to have fun. They're going to run around in the backyard or play Lego or do something else. Go on the computer. So they have this underlying weakness that's making it harder for them to engage within the material. Plus, they're not actually getting the same amount of time on task. They're not actually developing the same their skills at the same rate over time, or they're not getting the same time on task. So therefore, the rates aren't developing at the same rate over time. And so this gap between proficient and non-proficient readers keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And we've seen this for literacy, numeracy, and mathematics. So in the end, we get this gap. We have this gap that begins to emerge. Now in Ontario, what the Ministry of Education has been funding some programs over the course of several years during the summer to try and help minimize this. But these are known as kind of weak to moderate intensity summer programs. They're usually 2 to 3 weeks that are led by a teacher. And all students in these programs show gains. And that bottom, but what's really good is the bottom quartile, these students who are really weak, they show between a 10 to 30% increase in their literacy abilities during this time. So it's not closing the gap by any means, but it's definitely not allowing the gap to get exponentially larger. By sending that kind of bottom quartile students to these summer learning programs, we're actually seeing that their skills are continuing to develop over this time. So 2 to 3 weeks is nice. It's allowing for those skills to continue to develop, which is allowing them to not have as bad of a Matthew effect. They're getting more practice on it. They're getting more rich instruction so they can continue on that learning process and continue them along the way. So we know that we can do something about it. But again, we have to think about the different populations out there. So we know that low-income families, because they don't have the access to the materials, that they show a real gap that begins to increase. We know that students who have special needs, that they don't have access to materials, they also run into some difficulties so that they don't have it. But I think there's another group that's going to also begin to emerge during this time of COVID, is also due to those families that typically, you know, they send their students to school, they're doing well, but parents are now having to be teachers at home. They're having to be parents. They're having to find activities. The parents are getting stressed by all the activities and trying to balance all of our responsibilities from a day-to-day basis. And so I think now what we're seeing, or I think what we'll begin to see, is there are certain families where there's the general stressors within the family environment are mounting, and so those students will be kind of taken off task to not be able to kind of develop those skills as they're going through. So when we step back and we look at kind of this summer slide, what has the summer slide taught us about what's going on is that really it's a time off task. When you are not practicing reading, when you're not practicing literacy skills, when you're not practicing your numeracy skills, when you're not practicing those or engage in those, you lose those abilities. That might be to the fact that it's hard and so you don't want to do it. It might be that you don't have access to materials to be able to do it. Or in this case, there might be a factor where due to the family stress system that's going on, there's not the opportunity to connect to your remote classroom or to be able to be promoted to go and do reading. And unfortunately, I think sometimes we're promoting more screen time to be kind of the babysitter to look after our students. We're just saying, sit down and watch or play on the iPad or play on the computer or on your phone because I need to sit here and do my work. So whatever the reason being, it's really this time, this off-task time that becomes very problematic and that we need to start to think about in our programming. The other worry that we have for especially the special needs population is because we already have this Matthew effect going on, because we know that these students don't naturally kind of engage in working on reading and numeracy skills by themselves, plus they don't have access to their special education resources that they typically always get at school, especially to the intensity that they usually get at school. We're worried that these students are going more be have a greater impact on their academic achievements than other students, because we have multiple factors that are really getting in the way. We know that these students who have special needs, they really, especially in the younger grades, they really need a lot of intensity to develop their reading, their numeracy abilities, and so therefore we're not getting that same intensity that they would get during a typical school day of going to school for kind of 6 hours, 7 hours, and having more of that specialized programming going on. A lot of that is removed. So again, that's going to add to this kind of slippage, this gap that begins to emerge between typical and atypical students. So my worry is that when school resumes in whatever form it's going to resume in September, is that gap that we typically see after the summer slide has happened is going to be even greater and that difference there is going to exist due to different issues that might have added to the fact that students have had more off-time behavior. They haven't been practicing and engaging in those skills. And so some of the things I think we should all be thinking about in terms of how to be able to do this is what are some things that can happen? How can we be able to help out with the solutions? Now, typically the solutions for the summer slide that have been shown the best results is year-round schooling, spreading the 180 days of schooling over the course of the full school year. So you have equal kind of breaks at the winter time, at March, and in the summer. Each of those three break times are roughly about the same length. So you still get 180 days of school, you just don't have large pockets throughout it. In other jurisdictions, they've actually increased the number of days at school. They've increased the number of instructional time. So different people are doing different things. Now, those solutions don't really help us out. We can't change what is currently going on, but we do want to think about increasing the intensity. We do want to think about how do we get students back into practicing the skills that they need to do. So there's another thing called shadow education that has been talked about in the literature when it comes to the summer slide as a way to be able to help out. And really what shadow education is all the other types of education that takes place that's not done in kind of the standardized way for standard education reporting for credits, let's say. So it's the other things that are happening that are usually family-led or parent-led outside the school to be able to allow for their students to be able to do it. And that could be from tutoring programs to kind of programs being bought by parents to kind of bring in to be able to help out. So it could be a whole bunch of things that are out there. Now, when we're thinking about, okay, so what are the things that I can do to be able to help my child kind of improve? Well, we don't want to just kind of try and blanket the whole curriculum. What we do want to do is try and target some very specific skills. So we want to know what to actually target. And I think from what we've seen over the research around the summer slide is that the key things that we want to do is we want to target kind of the areas of literacy, in kind of both in the areas of reading and also vocabulary development, as also kind of mathematics, kind of being able to do that. And so what we need to do is create these opportunities during the day that students are continuing to be able to work on these kind of essential skills to be able to keep them up. Now, they don't have to be working for hours and hours each day, but we do need some time set aside to be able to work at it. When it comes to reading, students are all over the place in terms of how well they're reading. And so just giving a book to a student, say, just read a book is not the best way. What we want to do is kind of to find what is the right level of book for a student is to know that, take a paragraph and basically ensure that they can read 95% of those words accurately in that paragraph. If they're able to do that, if they're able to read 95% of words accurately in a paragraph, you know that reading, the book that you're giving them is at the right level. Now, you should also pick books that are of high interest to the students. We don't want to just be forcing them to read a certain genre on them. We need to allow and explore where their opportunities lie. Now we can also do this so we can have like formal reading time by having that 95% level and being able to give them time to be able to go off and read. But we can also do this indirectly. We could do this when reading a menu, let's say, or a recipe. So you might be cooking with your child and you could have them read out the list of ingredients to you, or you could be working on building something and have them read the list of ingredients or instructions. If they're playing a game, you could actually have them kind of to read the Wikipedia pages. So I know for Minecraft, there's a wonderful set of wiki pages on Minecraft, learning about redstone and different creatures and how to advance to next levels. You could use that as some time where they're actually sitting and reading. The key thing is we need to encourage our students to read. We'd like them to be reading somewhere in the ballpark of 20, 25 minutes each day on a regular basis just to keep up with that area of reading. Now, for students who have more challenging with reading, who are really having a hard time with this basic decoding processes, then we might need a more formalized program. And so getting a program off of Amazon, such as like how to teach your child to read in 100 easy lessons. It's a great program that parents can use to be able to help move through the stages of actually working with a student to be able to decode those individual words, to be able to blend sounds together, to be able to get words and how to be able to build up their fluency of reading those words. So that would be a way of, again, structuring your time on a very targeted program to help with the foundations of literacy. Vocabulary is another really important one. We have to continuously be exposing our children to new vocabulary. So is it, around the dinner table or when you're out on walks or watching a show, whenever you are hearing words that sound that your child might not know, make sure we're addressing those and teaching those, pointing those words out. And then when we're teaching a new word, what we want to do is tell how is that word similar to other words. So the word learning is like education, or it's like going to school, or it's like being able to do something I couldn't do. Learning is a word, it's a vocabulary word, it's a label for a concept. And the first thing we want to do is connect that label to other labels that the child might know, or describe other concepts that kind of that label, that word represents. So we want to be able to do that. The second thing is we want to encourage the child to use that word. So we don't want to just do it once. We want to come back a couple of times and say, hey, um, what does learning mean again? And then if they don't do it, go through the same process of going over it. Most students need exposure to a word between 3 to 7 times before they really understand what that word is. So we want to do that. If you're going into a tutoring program or some other form of educational program over the course of the summer, again, you don't want kind of a blanket program, but you do want the program to really be targeting on these specific core skills so that we continue to develop those core skills. Other knowledge, such as curriculum knowledge, we can continue to build that through the targeting of these skills, but it's really important to know that we're targeting the literacy and numeracy skills specifically to ensure that they're going through. Another thing that that's important to be looking for as we're going through this as well is the fact that we want to be able to track progress. So if you're working with a formal kind of training institute, or if we're as teachers, we're working with our students, we want to do progress monitoring along the way. We want to be kind of sampling students' abilities, their growth on these core skills over time, to actually show or demonstrate that we're not getting that gap. We're not seeing that summer slide occurring, but we're in fact continuing to develop. It's kind of the same way that we go to the gym. When we're working out at the gym, we can continue to see that we can do more reps, we can run for a longer period of time, we can be able to increase the weights. We can continue to see that we're actually making progress over time. So it's really important for us to measure that. And there's a whole set of measures out there called curriculum baseline measures, CBMs, that give us the tools to be able to sample the academic skills in the area of literacy and numeracy to ensure that students are making those types of gains on a week-to-week basis. So in many cases, the way that we think about CBMs or these measurement tools is kind of like the way we think of kind of a thermometer in medicine. So if someone says, oh, my head is hurting, or I don't feel well, we stick the thermometer in to see, do they have a temperature, as a first way of kind of ruling out. And if the child does have a temperature, then we can either just monitor that temperature and see if their body is able to kind of fight it and be able to bring the temperature down, or we might give an intervention such as medication and see if it's working. And so with a thermometer, we can keep sampling the child over time to be able to see if the medication's working or if their body's fighting off the infection. Same with the CBMs. We can every kind of 1 week or 2 weeks, we can monitor a student's progression in their reading abilities, in their spelling or writing abilities, in their mathematic abilities, and actually see if we're making those types of gains over time. So again, is the time on task that we're doing, is it actually being effective use of that time, and being able to monitor that? And if we do that, we should see that the students continue to make the types of changes that we want. And if they're not making the types of changes we want, then we can change it up. We can change up the intensity or what we're doing with them to try and see if we're continuing to push their skills along. But the key thing is we really want targeted programs that the students are doing, targeting specific skills that the students are working on a regular basis so that they're having that time on task. Now, in doing all this, we always have to think the barriers to implementation. This is a picture of Christie Park subway station. There's an escalator there, and then there's 4 steps. So as a father, I never realized how much of a barrier these 4 steps were, or I never realized how much of a barrier these 4 steps were until I was a father. And one night coming home late with the kids sleeping in the stroller and getting to these 4 stairs, having to then wake them up to carry the stroller up and put it down before I could hit the escalator to be able to help me on the rest of the way up. So we have to think of what those barriers are. Now, again, some of the things that we're seeing through our clinic in terms of barriers are, again, family stressors are pretty high. Parents feeling overwhelmed. So one more thing that I have to do on a day-to-day basis is trying to implement these programs. So that's a bit of a barrier, finding that time. Student stress being quite high, worrying about COVID, worrying about their family, especially if a family member has it. And while we know that when overall stresses are high, our ability to actually learn decreases significantly. And so creating those safe environments, that safe environment for our students to be able to learn is really, really important. For some of our behavioral students is actually just engaging in tasks, being able to have that regular structure they actually come to love every single day, knowing that I'm going to school now, these are the expectations of the classroom. When we remove that structure of the day, we actually see a lot of the behaviors increase because they don't know what's going to happen next. They don't know what the rhythm of the day is. And so the day has become very unpredictable and actually increases stress levels and can increase to off-task behaviors. Another barrier of implementation is awfully, it can be sometimes the child-parent relationship. Sometimes there's already friction there, and some parents aren't meant to be teachers. And so therefore they find that trying to get their child to sit down and do homework is a very stressful thing, and they get upset and angry that their child's not sitting there. And so therefore their anger or their frustration gets projected onto the child, and then the child responds back often with frustration, and then the frustration levels just continue to build and build and build. So that's a key one that we have to be thinking of. When we're doing more remote learning, we have to think about just internet connectivity these days. You know, not all individuals in our province have the same access to those remote connections. And how does that impact the ability to be able to ensure that we're giving good quality education? Sometimes just sending the packets home of the materials in there doesn't ensure that those packets are getting completed due to some of the other issues we've talked about in terms of just the family situations. And then at the end, another real barrier to all this is just the social component. One of the big things about school is there's a real social connection with other individuals of the same age, our friendship groups, and being able to be working in collaborative friend collaborative groups. Sitting down and doing a page of math by myself is not very exciting. When I did it with my friends and we could collaborate and do inquiry-based learning together, well, that was a lot more engaging to me. So with the reduction of the social component, that also is leading to frustrations and some of these barriers. So just having the perfect program or even thinking about the program isn't enough. Even if we have progress monitoring built into it, that's enough. We also have to think about what are the other barriers that could hinder a program coming in. And so when we bring these issues together, knowing about what the summer slide teaches us, that within kind of for many students, just being off school for 2 months can lead between a 10 and 30% reduction. For our students who have academic challenges in Ontario, we know that they lose about 3 months worth of schooling over those 2 months. Well, if we take that and draw it over to the kind of the 6 months that we're going to have off, then that is a lot of time not engaging in work. And when it comes to the literature that really teaches us what is one of the best ways of preventing the summer slide, it really is talking about ensuring that students have access to materials and ensuring that they're actually working on developing those skills. Time on tasks. If just going to the gym is not enough, you have to actually do the work on the weights. You have to do the cardiovascular training. Same with reading and mathematics and other literacy skills. We have to ensure that students are engaging in these skills on a day-to-day basis to help to ensure that those skills are developing. And if we've already had a bit of time off of those skills, then in the next 2 months, it's really going to be important to try and find ways to engage students in developing those skills, so that when we return in September, those students who would be typically disadvantaged by not having access or having learning challenges, that gap between proficient and non-proficient student that gap has not gone to a point where these students who are having challenges just have no ability to engage within the work, or are so far away that they just say, there's no way I'm going to be able to catch up. We need to be able to ensure that we're helping students develop their skills over the next course of the summer. And it's been really great to see Ontario step up with the many of the different programs that the Ministry of Education through the school boards have been able to provide, as well as other organizations kind of stepping up to be able to provide accesses to summer opportunities so that we can ensure that students are gaining access to the materials. They're getting that time on task so that they can have a better transition back into the school system when that happens. So thank you. At this point, if people have questions, or maybe Robin, I'll turn over to you to see if there's any questions that have been presented.
Sure, thank you. So some people have joined late, and I know there's some people that didn't join but had asked questions beforehand. So if you do want to ask a question, our group's a little bit smaller. I think some people weren't able to get away and online, so they'll watch the recording later. But if you want to type, there's a chat box at the bottom where you can type the question, or due to the small size of the group, if you're brave and want to unmute and ask your question, you can. And while we wait for people to sort of think, Dr. Cunningham, I'll just bring it back to an online question from registration that was brought up, which was a family that was sort of experiencing increased anxiety in their child because the parent was more at risk. So one of the things you talked about was the barriers, and one of them is sort of additional family stressors. And I think, as a parent, it's sort of, at what point, is it something I can handle on my own, or should I be seeking out, outside support in terms of increased levels of worry in kids?
Yeah, well, great question. So I think in general, we when we watch children's play, we all see them incorporating themes of COVID these days, and that's kind of their ability to kind of work through and think about it. When we're out in the communities, we see kids moving away from each other. So definitely it's on students' mind because, hey, the world has changed. Now, the challenge is, when does that go from kind of a normal kind of just, more conscious of this, worrying about this, to the point where that worry becomes kind of what we call impairing, where it becomes basically all consuming of their kind of mental resources, where they're constantly talking about it, or they're constantly in fear, feeling fearful that something's going to happen to a loved one. And when that fear level happens, what we often see is their thought process is always going to them. The worried thoughts begin to emerge. And again, often we see this in terms of when we're putting kids to bed at night, they often are talking about it. When we see them during the day, we see them kind of more disengaged. And when we ask them about, what are they thinking, what's going on, they often will kind of talk about it. So we see in kind of their overall themes that of their conversations we have with our children, that this theme of kind of worrying about COVID, or worrying about a loved one getting sick due to COVID, is always coming up. And so when that theme is constantly there, and we're seeing that the students are having a hard time engaging in the work, that's really starting to talk about this kind of getting to this impairing level. And what happens is, as we worry, we get more stress. So stress is our body's natural, or is a measurement of how much energy our bodies are using at any given time. When our stress levels get too high, because we are perceiving that there's a danger to us or a loved one out there, and we're now becoming hyper vigilant about what's going on. As that stress level gets too high to be able to keep us in this hyper vigilant watch, to be able to try and control the environment, or to be able to do what we can do to help protect ourselves or others, is that the body can only sustain that level of energy consumption for so long. And as that energy consumption is very high, as those stress levels are very high, then what happens is the body starts to pull energy from other places. And the first place it pulls from is the frontal lobe, the thinking part of our brain, our area of kind of generally focused attention that's needed for being able to do schoolwork. It turns off that part of the brain because it's saying, you're consuming way too much energy, and I need to take this energy, this resources that I have, and be able to devote it to the hypervigilance. We need to increase the attentional system to be able to be focused on what the worry is. And because of that, then it actually makes it very hard for the student to learn. This is why we talk about students need to be in safe places to be able to learn. We need students to actually feel calm, to be able to engage in learning. Because if they're worried too much, then their frontal lobe shuts off. They can't actually engage in the learning. And so therefore, you might be putting the book in front of them, or you might be asking them to sit down to do it. What the research shows is that they're not actually retaining the knowledge that they're developing during this time. And so therefore, it's another reason why students might have off-task behavior. Though they physically might be in front of the computer doing the work, or they might be physically sitting and doing the math questions on the sheet, if they're in such a high state of worry, then that's not actually leading to that on-task behavior. Their brain's not actually engaged in the on-task behavior of learning. So we do have to reduce that anxiety, those worries of our students. And we can do this by creating a safe place where they can talk about this, by helping to work through their worry thoughts, kind of bring them to a conclusion, by kind of coming up with procedures or ways of helping to ensure that it's not going to happen. So one of the common ones is we see about a fear of fire in a household. Kids have a hard time sleeping or concentrating because they're worried that a fire might happen. And so the family practices kind of the safety plan around fire, and then that helps resolve the worry, because now the child knows that the family has a plan. There's a strategy there to be able to safeguard them. And at some points, those worry thoughts do get to a point where even doing that doesn't help, and they continue to have difficulties falling asleep every night, waking up during the night, having nightmares, showing signs of distraction during the day. And so therefore, that's the point where we need to kind of work with a psychologist or another mental health provider to be able to intervene and develop some other coping strategies, to be able to have that child to be able to work through those worry thoughts and be able to live a healthier mental health life.
Thank you. Does anyone, no one's written in the chat box, so I don't know if there's any other questions where people are brave enough to unmute. And if not, we will sign off a little early. Thank you, Dr. Cunningham, for all your expert advice and information, and really sort of giving the research behind everything. And we are going to send out a follow-up survey, and we hope that you can fill it out just to help give us some feedback, because we're hoping that we can provide more information to parents and educators as we move forward through this time. So thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Dr. Cunningham. And see you next time.
Thank you, Robin. Yes. Have a good day, everybody. Bye.